Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
And yet, my grandfather was not wrong about my husband, Matilde thought, angrily slamming shut the drawer of the kitchen table. In fact, this drawer was not being used for its intended purpose. Her former, now definitively and irrevocably, ex-husband had turned it into a creative dumping ground. Francisco left all this stuff to Matilde as if emphasizing his selfless, non-materialistic essence. It's easy to be non-materialistic when you live at someone else's expense. Matilde didn't hesitate. She stuffed it into a large trash bag and tightly tied the strings. She didn't need any memories of past love. She promptly threw this bag, along with Francisco's work clothes, which were hopelessly stained with paint, straight into the garbage chute, and life became easier. Now she could return to the apartment, make herself a cup of coffee with milk, and think about everything. Of course, she didn't want to dwell on what happened. She wanted to throw this mess out of her memory or, at the very least, bury it beneath ordinary thoughts and everyday tasks. But her grandfather once gave her one of the invaluable pieces of advice: if something bad happens, don't lock yourself in. Think about it thoroughly, and then forget it forever. Matilde had been convinced more than once that it worked. You could succumb to the temptation not to think about the unpleasant and make every effort to distract yourself, go shopping and buy a whole pile of pleasant things, go to the car dealership for a new car, invite a friend over for a bottle of wine, or fly to the Maldives and have a frothy party there. The only question was the price. But here's the thing, neither trinkets nor a new car nor the Maldives would help heal the emotional pain. It would simply hide for a while and then, usually at the most inconvenient moment, burst out. Didn't Matilde herself see how it happened? For example, at her own wedding, Miriam, her longtime best friend, suddenly got up from the table in the midst of the celebration and rushed outside. "Francisco, wait for me here," Matilde asked. "What if something's wrong with Miriam? Who knows what could have happened?" She followed her friend, and it didn't take long to find her. Miriam was standing on the restaurant steps, avidly smoking a cigarette and crying bitterly. For some reason, Matilde remembered how the unbelievably expensive French mascara was running down her friend's cheeks. Miriam was so happy to have snagged that miracle at a discount, and now the mascara was wasted so clumsily. "Miriam," Matilde lightly touched her shoulder. "What's wrong? What happened?" Her friend sniffled, then wholeheartedly wiped her eyes with the palm of her hand. Well, rightly so, Matilde thought. Now there's definitely no reason to try to save her makeup. "Let's go," she said. "Finish your smoke, and let's wash your face." "It's all fine," Miriam sniffled. "I'm just envious. I look at you, newlyweds, everything is so good for you, just like in a fairy tale." "Well, you're exaggerating the fairy tale part," Matilde remarked. "Everyone else has the same story." Miriam shook her head. "No. You moved from the countryside to the city." "But my mom." "Exactly. Your parents got divorced, and your mother went to the city to chase money, but it worked out. And then there's you. You studied well, you have a job, and now you've married a handsome man." "And you studied well and have a job too," Miriam replied gloomily. "But I don't have a husband or even a good guy. And guys like yours, Francisco, have never looked my way. Remember, I had Alexis?" "Of course. And he ran away. He said, 'Sorry, Miriam, but freedom is more important to me.' And that's it, forget his name. I thought I'd at least have some fun at the wedding, but what's the use? You hold on, and then it hits you like a wave." Matilde remembered Alexis well and thought Miriam was upset over nothing. What had she found so precious in a drinking, divorced, rough guy to be so distraught over him? But that wasn't important now. Miriam was hiding her pain from everyone, even from herself. And now, she had so much pain that all that was left was to run outside and cry, because not crying was no longer an option, it was impossible. Now even psychologists say that you can't suppress bad, painful things inside. You have to live through them and then let them go. Gennaro, Matilda's grandfather, knew it without psychologists long before. And besides, the passing day brought not only bad things but also good things. And Matilda, warming her hands around the rounded sides of the coffee cup, began to reminisce. The train was already approaching the station, and as usual, a line of passengers had formed near the vestibule. Matilda didn't hurry. There was no desire to jostle among huge trunks, suitcases, and backpacks. After all, everyone could go to exit the carriage eventually. So why rush? But people, for some reason, were in a hurry, and somewhere at the front of the line, a tired child burst into tears, while at the end, a frail old lady cursed loudly, miraculously not breaking under the weight of her gigantic backpack. Such a fuss! Young lady, don't you plan on getting off? The old lady with the backpack asked Matilda. You're sitting here and waiting for something like it's your birthday. Matilda smiled. Your backpack must be heavy, Grandma. Want me to help you? The old lady, who was ready to start another quarrel, fell silent, fluttering her eyes in confusion, and then suddenly pointed at Matilda. She's a thief. She offered me help while getting closer to my backpack. You won't get anything from me. Thief. The conductor, who had rushed over at the cries, leaned towards Matilda and whispered, Don't pay attention. She's always like that. We're tired of her too. And then he turned to the old lady. Anything missing, Valeriana? He asked briskly. Nothing missing so far, but she tried to get my backpack. Well, if everything's in place, there's nothing to worry about, the conductor smiled. I don't want to be near her, the old lady stubbornly insisted. You won't have time to look back, and she'll snatch something. Then move forward, Valeriana. Come, I'll guide you. The queue grumbled in protest. Well, friends, the conductor kindly addressed the people. She's of a respectable age, standing for a long time is hard for her. You all have mothers and fathers, too. Maybe people will let them go first, and they won't have to stand in line. Let's respect the older generation and let them through. The old lady continued to grumble about her age and that standing was not difficult for her, but the conductor wasn't listening anymore. Supporting the troublemaker by the elbow, he escorted her to the exit. How did he handle her? A professional, someone approvingly noted. Matilda chuckled. Indeed, quite skillfully. The train shook thoroughly before the stop. Matilda stood up and gathered her things. That's how it was, she traveled with just a small bag and returned with a whole load of belongings. There were quite a few memorable items left in Grandfather Gennaro's house. How to leave behind, for example, the books that Grandpa first read aloud to his little granddaughter and then she read to him. And the wonderful tablecloths that Grandma embroidered herself. There were also chess sets that Grandpa crafted to teach Matilda how to play. And the stylish onion-shaped clocks. Where did Grandpa get them from? There were also wax candles that the old Gennaro himself poured and small homemade honey barrels, each one decorated uniquely. Lovely, dear little things. No, she couldn't just leave them behind. She leaned towards her bag and inhaled the scent of apples from Grandpa's garden. After all, you can't leave apples either. How Grandpa cared for his apple trees, how much effort he put into them, and how magical the garden became in spring. And in autumn too. The head was spinning from the enticing scent of the juicy apples. Of course, she couldn't take the entire harvest with her. Matilda distributed most of it to her neighbors. Francisco would be pleased, too. Her husband always said that apples from Grandpa's garden had a special taste. Matilda looked out the window, hoping to see her husband on the platform. She sent him a message, asking him to pick her up, but the internet connection on the road was low. She didn't know if Francisco received her message, but when she saw him, Matilda smiled. He did. She was about to wave at him but froze with her hand raised, but then she saw her husband wasn't alone. A woman approached him, and immediately, Francisco opened his arms, pulled her close, and leaned in to kiss her lips. The woman pressed against him, her hands on Francisco's shoulders. Breaking away from the desired lips, she turned around, and for a moment, Matilde stopped breathing. It was Miriam, her beloved and closest friend. Miriam, how could she do this? Are you getting off? The conductor delicately reminded her. Matilde turned sharply towards him. Let me sit here in the compartment for a while. I'm feeling a bit unwell. She wearily sat on the lower bunk and tried to smile. I won't stay long. Please. The conductor was observant. Following Matilda's gaze, he also saw the embracing couple. Husband? He asked. Matilde smirked. And best friend. Like in a movie. The conductor thoughtfully rubbed his chin. You sit for now. Let me bring you some coffee, I have a good one. And now she was sitting alone in an empty compartment, drinking coffee and staring out the window at the collapse of her love. The station was, as always, noisy, but even now, for Matilde, this hustle and bustle and the cacophony of voices sounded like beautiful music. There was life here. People hurried, rejoiced, bid farewell, and called out to each other. It was life. Matilde spent 10 days in the village and grew tired of the rural, quiet life, especially of the sorrow. Grandpa Gennaro died quietly, sitting on a bench near his house and basking in the warm August sun. And all this time, while Matilde organized the funeral and then commemorated old Gennaro with the villagers, it seemed to her like a farce. It seemed like she would step out of the house, and Grandpa would still be sitting on the bench, winking at her, fell for it. A couple of times, she even peeked out of the window. Once, she even went into the yard and caught a silhouette in her peripheral vision, but of course, she never really saw Grandpa. A person died, there was nothing we could do about it. Matilde silently bids him farewell. She and her grandfather had various relationships. She was afraid of him in her childhood because Gennaro wasn't of a gentle nature and could swat with nettles for a misdeed, yet she always loved him because Grandpa was kind, despite the disciplinary nettles. He always brought a huge bag of gifts for his granddaughter from the city, and there was everything: toys, a couple of books straight from the store, intoxicatingly smelling, new ones, candies with cookies, and to show off, as he said, colorful hair ties and various hairpins with flowers, butterflies, and dragonflies. Matilde still keeps her favorite one with a green leaf and a ladybird sitting on it with golden antennae. She treasures it as a talisman, sometimes taking it out to stroke it. And then, when her father left the family and her mother was frantic all over the house, wandering and crying and asking how they could live now with their daughter, Grandpa Gennaro forcefully sat her down at the table and held her hands, not letting her get up. He said, "Matilde, bring a glass of water for your mother." And only when 8-year-old Matilde brought a huge jug of water did Grandpa release his future daughter-in-law's hand and say, "Drink." Mom obediently took a sip and then quickly finished the entire glass. Perhaps she had long wanted to drink, but she didn't realize it. Gennaro nodded approvingly and began to speak impatiently and thoughtfully. His voice alone made the soul calmer and somehow brighter, as if someone had walked through a cluttered, dark room, swept away all the garbage, pulled back the curtains, and opened the windows wide. And you stand there, look around, and realize that the room has turned out to be spacious. There is enough light here, and it's easy to breathe. "Even though Roberto's my son," Gennaro said, "after such disgrace, I won't even let him cross the threshold of this house. He abandoned his wife and child. As long as he doesn't come back, I won't let that scoundrel come back. But why don't you head to the city for work? Leave Matilde here. I'll look after her. With your salary, my pension, and my bees bringing in money, we'll live well, won't we? Of course, we will. We'll even save money. You can come on weekends, and when you go on vacation, you and Matilde can go on a trip. When the girl finishes school, she'll come to visit you in the city. So, what do you think?" Mom asked for more water, drank it, wiped her mouth with her palm, and pondered. "Well done, Gennaro," she said. "You've thought everything through correctly. Look, we'll manage on our own, without your son. He's no longer my son now, the grandfather said sternly. After such a thing, I don't have a son. There's only Matilde, my dear granddaughter, and you, because you're like a daughter to me now. Mom gratefully sniffled and hugged her father-in-law. That's how Matilda's new life began. Her father didn't reconcile, and nobody was waiting for him. The squad didn't notice the loss of a soldier, Grandpa said. He left, and that's the end of it. The next day, Mom went to the city to look for a job. She returned only late in the evening, soaked from the autumn rain and very, very happy. She was lucky. They offered her, a nurse from the rural clinic, to retrain as a cosmetologist, and most importantly, a cosmetology clinic would cover all the training expenses. They even offered to help with housing. So maybe I should take Matilde with me right away? Mom wondered. I'll enroll her in school, she'll study, and I'll work. Don't rush, Gennaro advised. You won't have time for that now. By the time you settle there and steady yourself, there'll be a child to care about. You'll have to take her to school, prepare lunch for her, and check her homework. You'll be overwhelmed alone. Let Matilde stay. You know, she'll be with me like a treasure under my pillow. Mom knew that well, so she decided not to argue. And then Matilde and Grandpa set the table and arranged a festive dinner to celebrate the beginning of a new chapter in life. It's scary, though, Gennaro, Mom sighed. I've lived here all my life. Everyone knows me, and I know everyone. You can ask anyone for anything, and they'll help without hesitation. It's all familiar. I won't get lost, even at night. But there, I'll look around. People are all serious, bustling around. No one greets anyone. And no one dear around, neither you nor Matilde. Grandpa smiled. When I came back from the army, he said, I thought of entering a college, but I was late that year. It was embarrassing to sit on my parents' neck, so I decided to go to the north. They paid well there, but there was a ton of work. When I came back from the shift, I couldn't feel my legs. We, the workers, lived in a dormitory. There was a room for 5 people. We came in and went straight to our beds. And we fell asleep before our heads touched the pillow. So what do I want to tell you? When I came back from the army, everything seemed alien already. And a week passed. Where did it all go? Everything is familiar. Everything is routine. Up north, during the first 2 days, I wanted to go back out of homesickness, but after a month, I got used to it. I'm saying this to emphasize that new things are always scary at first. But you'll get used to it, and then you'll look back and wonder, what was so scary? Mom smiled and drew Matilde closer, tousled her daughter's light bangs, and looked into her eyes deeply, to the very bottom. Always listen to Grandpa, learn properly, and don't forget to do household chores. Promise? Matilde promised. Mom's departure was a rather unhappy event, but Grandpa Gennaro was there for her. Your mom did it for you, she works hard. Don't be mad at her for leaving, he said, and Matilde nodded in agreement. I'm not mad, Grandpa, I just miss her. Gennaro stroked her head, and his eyes became sad. I miss her too, he admitted. She became a daughter to me, my dear daughter. Mom came for the weekend and brought with her a new winter jacket for Matilde, super comfortable waterproof gloves for Gennaro, and the scent of some flowery perfume, along with a pile of urban gossip and, most importantly, good news. I turned out to be capable, she said joyfully. They already trust me to do some things, facial cleansing and massages. So, I'm earning a little. Look, I bought new jeans and winter boots for myself. Here, she blushed a little. I could do without it, but still, I work in such a place that I have to look. Gennaro frowned. It seems like you're apologizing. I don't want to hear anything like that from you again. You live in the city, work, study, and take care of us and Matilde. And so you say you can't spend anything on yourself? Nonsense. Better sit down, we'll set the table. From that day on, Mom came every weekend, always with gifts, and she herself looked noticeably better than before. She had lost some weight, dyed her hair a wonderful copper color, and it suited her very well. She immediately began to look fresher and younger. And the new wardrobe, modern and fashionable, completed the transformation. Now she looked like a very young girl. Matilde and Grandpa, of course, were delighted with such a transformation, but rumors began to spread through the village. Someone even started gossiping that Gennaro's daughter-in-law was engaged in all sorts of indecent activities in the city. Either she danced a striptease in nightclubs, or she found herself an old and disgusting rich man and shamelessly was a mistress because the rich man had been married for a long time and had no intention of getting divorced. And somehow, these rumors reached Matilda's father. Previously showing no interest in his ex-wife and daughter, he ambushed Mom during one of her visits, right in front of their house, and attacked her with his fists. Matilde and Grandpa heard Mom scream and rushed out of the house, where they saw a completely drunk man right in front of them. He could barely stand on his feet, and Mom, frightened and disheveled, was holding onto her face. There was a bruise forming under her eye. "Matilde, what are you waiting for?" Gennaro said, quickly assessing the situation. "Bring the rifle." Matilde darted into the house, and at the same time, her biological father looked at Grandpa Gennaro with a bewildered, childishly offended gaze. "How can this be, Dad?" "So, you'll shoot your own son?" "I will," Gennaro replied without hesitation. "Get out of here, scoundrel, and don't come near my family. I'll kill you." The man hesitated a bit, then slowly trudged away. His broad shoulders slumped as if he carried an immense weight on his back, and it bent him towards the ground. "Let's go, daughter," Gennaro said, taking his future daughter-in-law by the arm. "Don't be afraid, he won't touch you anymore." Later, Mom cried, and Grandpa poured her a bit of moonshine, making her drink it in one gulp. "Now go to sleep," he said. "We'll treat your bruise. We'll make a compress now, and tomorrow you'll be as good as new." Mom rested and calmed down, and the bruise healed. They didn't talk about what happened, there was no need. But 2 days later, the police found Matilda's father's body in the river. They said that on that fateful evening, returning from his father's house, he bought more alcohol and, intoxicated, fell into the river, and in early November, the water in the river was cold. There were those who condemned old Gennaro for his cruelty. He drove away his own son and even threatened to shoot him. Matilde and her mom stood up for Gennaro, but he didn't say a word. He didn't attend his son's funeral, and he never visited his grave. Matilde often wondered what Grandpa Gennaro truly felt. Perhaps he regretted decisively breaking all ties with his son or tried to console himself by standing up for his daughter-in-law and granddaughter. One day, she shared her doubts with her mom. "If Grandpa doesn't want to talk, he won't. But we will never forget that he turned away from his son for our sake. Grandpa gave me the opportunity to earn a living peacefully. I never worried about you because I knew Grandpa would take care of you so well that there was even something to learn from him. I always knew you were healthy, well-fed, and living in warmth and love. Therefore, my dear, we will always love our Grandpa and care about him in return, and we will never abandon him, no matter what happens." Matilde nodded silently. Mom said the most important thing, the most crucial thing, that helped calm down and understand what to do next. And from then on, it was simple: take care, love, and ignore those who spoke ill of Gennaro. "Let's bake potato pies," Mom suggested. "Grandpa loves them." They began kneading the dough together, cooking, and stuffing the potatoes. When Gennaro entered the kitchen and saw his future daughter-in-law and granddaughter making pies, he smiled for the first time since the funeral. "Let me help you," he said. Gennaro had big hands, even rough-looking, but he rolled out the dough delicately. Despite adding plenty of filling, the dough never tore, and the seams on the pastries turned out neat and beautiful. "Where did you learn this, Dad?" the future daughter-in-law asked. She watched him carefully, as it was the first time she dared to call her father-in-law Dad, but he responded calmly, showing no surprise. "On the north, dear. A young lad taught me there. He said his father was a cook, so he learned from him." His mother, as he said, never cooked, she was a plasterer painter. So Dad cooked and Mom did repairs, Matilde laughed. Grandpa smiled. Yes, it happens that way. As long as it brings joy. As long as it brings joy, Matilde echoed. She would remember these words for a lifetime and firmly believe in their truth. Oh, Grandpa, maybe you shouldn't have said that then? Perhaps, if you hadn't said it, Matilda's life would have turned out happier, she thought with melancholy. As long as it brings joy, she said when she finished school and, upon arriving in the city, immediately got a job as a night store cashier. She didn't want to live on Mom's money. On the contrary, she wanted to help both Mom and Grandpa. Mom, of course, tried to persuade her to quit this job and study peacefully, but Matilde cherished her splendid sense of independence. The days when she received her salary and divided it into 3 parts, for Mom, Grandpa, and herself, were real celebrations for her. As long as it brings joy, she said to herself when she decided she wanted to become a veterinarian. Mom laughed. Matilde, I have my own beauty salon. You could get a degree and then work with me. But Matilde shook her head. Making people beautiful was important, of course, but she wanted to heal sick animals. As long as it brings joy, she told herself when she discovered that her beloved, insanely talented, and incredibly beautiful Francisco, simply another unrecognized genius, blamed the world for his paintings not hanging in the Louvre yet. But Matilde loved him and silently endured her husband's complaints, his endless laziness, and his unwillingness to earn. But they were together, that's what she thought. Maybe in vain. Yet she begged him to go to the village with her. He knew what Grandpa meant to her. Mom got stuck in Argentina, weather was bad there. How she cried because she couldn't come to the funeral. And Francisco, knowing about it, still came up with 1,000 reasons why he wouldn't go with his wife. Matilde, I understand you very well, but you must also understand me. I have a competition coming up. If I don't finish the painting in time, I'll miss the boat. You know how important it is for me to make a name for myself. I'm a creative person. Recognition is everything to me. Don't be angry, my dear, I'm begging you. She fell silent. Francisco spoke so fervently, even passionately. Perhaps this competition was genuinely important to him, and it wasn't his fault that the deadline for submissions was just a week away, but it still hurt. But you got to know about the competition a long time ago, Matilde ventured to object. Why did you wait until the deadline with this painting? Her husband looked at her offendedly. I had no inspiration at all. How can I create without it? I'm an artist. An artist, right. And inspiration is, of course, important. I'll be thinking about you all the time, he promised. Now, looking at Miriam, who seemed to have glued herself tightly to Francisco, Matilde smiled sadly. It seems he did find inspiration after all, and quite a bit of it. She was watching how passionately Miriam clung to him. I wonder, what was she even doing here? Did she really come with Francisco to meet her deceiving friend? But why? To reveal the whole truth to Matilde and laugh? It was odd. There could have been a better place for that. But then Matilde noticed something she hadn't paid attention to in the first few minutes. A large travel bag was lying at Miriam's feet. So that was it. This means the entire encounter on the elbow was a pure coincidence. Francisco didn't receive a message from his wife and came to the station only to send off his lover. For some reason, hysterical laughter welled up in Matilda's throat, and she tried so hard to keep it inside that tears welled up in her eyes. What nonsense it was! He showed up at the station with a lover, where there were plenty of people. And he was a married man with a wife who was a veterinarian, known to half their town. No, it was truly funny. The conductor, passing by, stopped. Don't be so upset, he said sympathetically. Even your eyes have turned red. No, Matilde replied. It's just from laughter. Can you believe he was such a fool, exposing himself to the whole town like that? The only question is, what should I do about it? It's kind of embarrassing. Believe me, it's my husband who's cheating, and I'm ashamed that I found out about it. I believe you, the conductor smiled. About 10 years ago, I came back from a trip, and my wife was lying on the couch with her lover, drinking champagne. I felt very awkward, too. I even apologized. By the way, quite sincerely. He recounted this with such a calm and matter-of-fact tone that Matilde immediately understood all the turmoil was in the past. And what happened next? She asked. She was genuinely curious. Next? Nothing special. First there were quarrels, divorce, then I met someone else. She's my wife now. And that's it. What about your ex-wife? What happened to her? I don't know. And why do I need to know? She made her choice, and so did I. Well, what about you? Matilde looked at Francisco and Miriam again. There was passion between them. They don't see anyone around them, they just can't tear apart from each other. I don't know what to tell you, she sadly confessed, but it seems they're not asking me. I have no choice. There is always an option. Matilde sharply raised her head. The voice of this unfamiliar, in general, person was so much like her grandfather's voice. Yes, she said, standing up, there always is an option. Thank you for reminding me of that on time. Now all her confusion, awkwardness, disappointment turned into a cold rage. Matilde confidently strode to the exit. It seemed even her bag, which was quite heavy, by the way, suddenly became lighter than a feather. She effortlessly hopped off the footstep, smiling dazzlingly. Francisco finally noticed the belated passenger. Matilde? Miriam turned to see who her sweetheart was talking to, and she squinted when she saw her friend. Hello, Matilde continued to smile. See how silly it turned out. I thought you came to meet your wife, and now you're seeing off your lover. Miriam, why don't you even say hello? You behave as if you're a stranger. Francisco took a deep breath and suddenly said something. Matilde, stop this, he shouted. Stop what? Stop playing the fool. Aren't you ashamed? He shouted louder. Blood rushed to his face, and veins bulged on his neck. Matilde was surprised to discover that her handsome husband could look quite ugly. Oddly enough, she had encountered people whose anger even adorned them, yet Francisco's eyes turned into crooked slits, and his mouth seemed like a black hole. It was horrifying. Aren't you ashamed, he continued, reprimanding his wife. It's so low to spy. You were sitting there in the carriage as if you were watching a movie. It was a boring movie, by the way, Matilde interjected. The lyrical scenes are drawn out, there's no dynamics, and there are too few plot twists. In general, it barely passes for a C grade. I've seen more interesting films. It doesn't matter. You hid, watching us. It's called spying. And now, after you've seen enough, do you dare to reproach me? You. How don't you understand that it's vile, low, disgusting, and that it's ultimately just immoral? Matilde nodded thoughtfully. Indeed, how could I dare? Every woman should understand it perfectly. When catching a husband with a lover, the woman should stay silent and pretend not to know anything. You're right, Francisco, absolutely right. You're unlucky to marry an ill-mannered woman. Well, at least you understand that. Francisco fixed a strand of hair that fell on his face, looking indignant. His hair was splendid, a true wonder, long, heavy, and curling in large rings. Francisco was well aware of this and took care of this capricious beauty as well as any woman would. One of his shampoos cost. Well, no matter how much it cost, he didn't pay for it himself. It was Matilde who did it, the obliging and loving wife. Besides shampoo, he needed an expensive conditioner, moisturizing masks, and, of course, monthly visits to the hair salon, hair Botox, shielding, and a hot scissor cut. Oh Lord, this mane costs me more than my own, Matilde thought in confusion, mentally calculating the expenses for her husband's hair. You have beautiful hair, she said aloud. It's a pity your head is empty. What? If only you had a brain, you wouldn't care. Now it's clear. Francisco froze in place with a half-open mouth, astonished. Matilde hadn't allowed herself to express herself so vulgarly before, and she took advantage of the pause to continue. And here's what I'm going to tell you, the artist loafer. Get out of my life today and forever. I'm going home, and you have time until 10 in the evening to pick up your stuff and disappear. I'll file for divorce myself and pay all the fees, but just make sure I never cross paths with you again. That's it. And now, excuse me, I'm in a hurry. Having said it all, Matilde suddenly realized very clearly that she was telling the pure truth. She was not trying to sting harder, threaten, or save face and look calm. She just said what had long been a burden on her heart but couldn't be articulated earlier, either because she didn't know how or because she was afraid. But she really was tired of carrying it all alone. She was fed up with talks about inspiration, the pursuit of which she paid for. Often, she didn't even want to come home from work because a monstrous mess awaited her there, which Francisco called creative chaos, a cold stove. Matilde, sweetheart, when do I get to cook? It tormented me all day, searching for the right composition. And, of course, an empty fridge. That was the least mysterious thing. Francisco didn't bring any money home but was always curious about the bags Matilde brought from the stores. I've wanted to say all this for so long. Why did I keep silent? Why? Francisco's face became arrogant. Do you understand that you won't be able to take back the words you just said? I'll never be able to forgive you for this, I just won't. And even if I continue living with you, I'll always remember. It's like you stabbed me with a knife, the wound will heal, but the scar, Matilde, will remain forever and remind me of everything. It won't, his wife reassured him. You'll live your life, and I, for my part, promise that I'll do everything possible not to be seen by you ever again, my dear. And now, let me leave. He nodded absent-mindedly. Miriam caught up with her friend right at the bus stop. Don't you want to tell me something? She asked. Matilde smiled, adjusting her bag more comfortably. Maybe I would like to, but I just don't know what. Ask you how you could date my husband if we're friends. Well, somehow, you managed that. Ask if you're not ashamed. Maybe you are, but does that change anything? It seems I can only ask you one question. What's that? Miriam perked up. Tell me. Aren't you going to miss your train? It seems like you're about to leave somewhere. Miriam instantly deflated at this question, even slouching a bit. This wasn't what she expected to hear. Sorry, Matilde said, I probably disappointed you, but I really don't have anything else to ask you. She patted her friend on the shoulder. Don't worry. Francisco is a hot-tempered guy. He'll provide you with stormy relationship discussions, scenes of jealousy, and passionate reconciliations. In short, everything you crave. Well, then, go on. Hurry up, or you'll be late. No trace of offense. Not even a surprise, it seemed to have stayed there on the train. Nothing. Just a cold understanding that her friendship with Miriam was over, and, to be honest, she didn't mind. Can friends act like this? Then it isn't friendship at all. Matilde, Miriam suddenly said, I wasn't planning to go anywhere. It was part of my plan, you know. Plan? Matilde couldn't hold back a smirk. Wanted to show that my husband is cheating on me. It's so silly, Miriam. If you thought I didn't figure that out, then you don't know me very well. And not just me, but people in general. Shall we go to the cafe? Miriam suggested, nodding towards a store across the bus stop. We need to talk. Is it necessary? Francisco is probably worried about you, waiting and searching. It's necessary, Francisco can wait. Let me help you, she said, lifting Matilda's travel bag. Let's go. Matilde shrugged and followed. I can't leave you with such luxurious apples, she muttered. And I wouldn't mind a cup of coffee anyway. Inside, it was not cozy. Some unpleasantly tiled walls, reminiscent of a hospital cafeteria. Only there, in the cafeteria, did it smell of stewed cabbage and soup, while here, it smelled of beer and just a little bit of coffee. All the furniture was plastic. It was probably done for practical reasons. It was easy to replace, quick, cheap, and it wouldn't hurt so much if it got ruined. Miriam chose a table at the back of the hall, away from the few customers. "It's not a pleasant place," she said, looking around. Matilde sat on a cold plastic chair and crossed her legs. "I like it here," she said. "It somehow fits. Unpleasant place, unpleasant company, and our conversation is likely to be unpleasant." Miriam mysteriously shook her head. "Our conversation is more likely to be unexpected. You were wrong about my intentions. I didn't plan to show you that Francisco is a handsome man." "Really?" Matilde genuinely laughed. "But that's exactly what you showed." "It was my goal," Miriam calmly stated. "I wanted to cause you pain. I just wanted you to feel what it's like when your loved ones betray you. Francisco happened to be in my game by chance. He just suited the purpose. So don't think too much about him. I orchestrated this whole meeting today." She closed her eyes, recalling. Waking up in someone else's bed was utterly foolish. Miriam always tried to avoid sleeping anywhere, no matter where she spent her time. Foreign sheets smelled different, and the morning sun revealed all the discomforts of someone else's dwelling. Such accommodation, even if covered in gold and adorned with diamonds, was always uncomfortable because it was foreign. There's no favorite cup on the nightstand, the view from the window was unfamiliar, and instead of a leisurely morning with a coffee and a nourishing face mask, there was only discomfort and one thought in the head: how to get home as quickly as possible. Waking up in Francisco's bed, in general, wasn't any different from other uncomfortable awakenings. Miriam opened her eyes and immediately closed them again. There was no desire to look around. Water was running in the bathroom. As it turned out, Francisco was a morning person. He woke up so early. Or maybe he just slept poorly. Then she heard a short beep from the phone. Not hers, Francisco's. Without looking, Miriam reached for the nightstand. According to her calculations, Matilde should have been back soon. Probably she texted and asked to pick her up. She wasn't wrong. Arriving today at 6, be there. There you go, Miriam chuckled. The final act of her play was approaching. "I'm still a talented director," she whispered, deleting the message. She put the phone back in place and stretched in bed. Indeed, talented. Francisco returned from the shower wet, naked, and desperately yawning. "There are no towels in the bathroom," he said. "I threw them somewhere yesterday, but I don't know where." Water dripped from wet curls in thin streams. There was a distinct smell in the air. Miriam smiled and shrugged. "Well, you'll have to shake yourself dry." "Like a dog." "Like a dog?" Francisco frowned. "No, like a wolf. A lonely and beautiful wolf. Come to me, I want to kiss you." He willingly obeyed. Unlike his wife, Miriam knew how to seduce. Although he had noticed that everyone had such a skill, the main thing was to want to seduce and not hide it. Matilde didn't want to seduce. Not that she considered it unnecessary, but more likely, it simply never occurred to her. Matilde just observed, while Miriam flirted. Matilde smiled, and Miriam sensually bit her lip. Matilde talked, and Miriam purred. And to be honest, of the two, Matilde was more attractive, but Miriam wanted to charm and entice, and this couldn't fail to flatter male vanity. It forgot, Miriam sweetly purred. "I'm leaving today." "Where to?" He wondered. "To my cousin's wedding. The train is at 6:30. Will you come to see me off?" "Well, you know, I actually need to finish my painting for the competition." Francisco hesitated. Miriam burst into laughter and playfully kissed her lover on the nose. "You haven't even started it. Come on, Francisco, dear, see me off. Do you know what I want?" What? Just don't laugh, okay? I always wanted my beloved to escort me to the very train and then stand there watching as the train keeps departing, and I would wave to him through the window. I've dreamed of this since childhood, I don't even know why. Miriam looked at him with pleading eyes. Okay, Francisco smiled, if it's your dream. It was pleasant for him to feel like the fairy from the tale who knows how to fulfill cherished wishes. Consider me convinced, he added. But why did you need all this? Matilde was puzzled. You could have met with him calmly and moved on. We could have talked, and I wouldn't have held on to him. You still don't understand anything, Miriam snapped irritably. I didn't need him, and I never did. I wanted to get back at you. But for what? This, she paused, is a completely different story, and it started a long, long time ago when your father left the family and Grandpa Gennaro sided with your mother. Matilde frowned. Grandpa? What does he have to do with it? And my father, too. He died when I was still a child. I've told you, he drowned in the river because he was drunk. Because he was drunk, right? Miriam nodded knowingly. I know that just as well as you do. I buried him. I used to come to his grave later to pull out weeds and plant flowers. There was no one else to do it. His real father, your grandfather, turned away. So, I was the only one who visited. He did drown because he was drunk, but that is the end of the story. The beginning is not there. Before. Maybe we should order coffee? She suddenly suggested. Matilde shook her head. Tell me, I want to hear this story. All right, Miriam said thoughtfully. As you wish. By the way, do you remember your father well? Matilde shrugged. I don't remember much about him. I was always with my mom and grandpa. Father. I remember he was always kind of gloomy and grim. I was always timid when he spoke to me. I couldn't feel comfortable around him, and now I know why. He just didn't spend time with me. He was like a cloud. He would come, it would get gloomy, but then he'd leave, and everything would be fine again. So you didn't love your own father? Miriam seemed very surprised. I think, Matilde admitted, I never had a chance to love him. He was always working, or that's what they told me, I'm not sure. He would come and go. I spent all my holidays with Mom and Grandpa, and the vacations too. I don't even remember us talking about anything. Only if he asked something would I answer, and he always asked something trivial, like where are the nails, or bring some water. That's all we've talked about. Strange, Miriam whispered, although, if you think about it, it's not strange at all. Your father, Matilde, wasn't at work but at my mom's place. You see, it was a very sad affair. Your father had just finished school, and he had been in love with my mom for a long time, since middle school. She was such a stately, large, and beautiful woman. I can even show you a photo later. Well, okay, just believe me for now. And Matilde, of course, immediately believed. It was enough for her to look at Miriam to recognize her mother in her youth. Marta had 3 suitors. It was a rich selection, considering it was a village. The first was Julio, a nerd in glasses with perpetually tousled curls. Nowadays, they might say he resembled Harry Potter and even found him attractive, but at that time, this type had not yet become popular, and the serious Julio was deprived of the girls' attention. The second was Antonio, who had recently returned from the army. Of course, he had more chances. After all, having served, one could say he was an adult man with experience and worldly wisdom. The girls sighed over him, and their mothers often invited Antonio over for a cup of coffee, to try some hot pie, and, incidentally, to find out his plans for the future. Antonio didn't refuse the invitations, but he wasn't in a hurry to share his plans. But everyone could see how he gazed at the well-developed, precociously mature Marta, who was not of her age. It wasn't even about her lush forms, but rather her special, confident way of speaking and moving. She entered school not as a student, but rather as a teacher who had long been accustomed to her work and was even tired of it. It seemed Marta had some natural force. Her peers were still girls, but she was almost an adult woman. There was no girlish shyness, no blushing cheeks. Only a direct gaze and a faint smile at the corners of her lips. The third suitor was Roberto, a silent, devoted man whom Marta barely noticed, but it was he who carried her satchel, met her at the door in the morning, and escorted her home after classes. They spoke little. Marta was not too talkative, and Roberto. Who knows? It seemed he was content just being near his beloved. Marta herself enjoyed that all three of her admirers paid attention to her, not favoring any of them. She didn't rush. However, graduation was approaching, and the girl, thinking about the future, realized that she would have to make her choice after all. While most of her classmates were discussing how to escape from rural life to the city and start their adult lives, Marta could only sigh bitterly. Her adult life had already begun, and now all that remained was to accept it and try to live sensibly. The girl lost her parents early, and of all her relatives, only her grandmother remained. She was paralyzed. She couldn't go to the city. Marta understood that as long as her grandmother was alive, she was tied to the native village. And if she had somehow learned to take care of the bedridden grandmother, managing the household would have been much more difficult. It was too heavy for one person. And whether she wanted it or not, if she stayed in the village, with a paralyzed grandmother in her arms, with work and all the household chores at once, sooner or later she would have started thinking about marriage. Not about love, Marta did not dream about it, just about a handyman who was reliable and strong. Considering the candidates, she immediately rejected Julio. Julio's parents made him go to the city to enroll in a physics and technology university and become a prominent scientist. Julio himself kept silent about his intentions, but judging by the passion with which he buried himself in textbooks, he would fulfill his parents' hopes. Marta smiled, remembering how Julio once invited her on a date to the school library. And when the girl decided to take a look out of curiosity, she saw her admirer with a whole stack of poetry collections in his hands. "I'm not a fan of romance," he explained apologetically. "I thought I'd somehow prepare some poems for you to read." "Go ahead," Marta agreed, and the evening of romance began. Julio's memory was indeed magnificent. How did he manage to memorize so much? He read without stumbling, never peeking at a single word. But listening to him was impossible. The guy might be a brilliant future scientist, but as an actor, he was absolutely terrible. He rambled on lyrical lines as if reciting mathematical formulas. Marta even managed to doze off during his monotonous mumbling. No, what kind of husband could he be? He needed books, not a simple village life. Antonio, a seasoned veteran, seemed good to everyone, but he started going to the city too often, and people whispered that he had a girlfriend there. They said she was older, beautiful, and divorced. Of course, the accuracy of the rumors could not be verified. Marta decided to find a moment for an open conversation. As for Roberto, she hadn't really thought about him. He was too accustomed, too docile, and too ready for everything for Marta. He was not independent, that was her verdict. Living with someone like that meant managing everything herself. If she told him to do something, he'd do it immediately, he wouldn't refuse, but he wouldn't decide or guess anything on his own. That's exactly what she told him on that fateful graduation day, after which their already complicated lives went completely awry. If Marta's refusal meant something to Roberto, he didn't show it. "There's no winning love by force," he said. He even smiled encouragingly, but it still felt pitiful. Roberto just patted her on the shoulder, as if to say, "You've made your decision, stay in touch, good luck to you," and walked away. Marta wanted to catch up with him to explain something, maybe even apologize, but she restrained herself. After all, it wouldn't change anything, and it could make things worse. It would turn out that not only did she not choose him, but now she would also start explaining why. Such resentment would arise. Why further torture herself? Especially since there was a new deal ahead of her, she needed to talk to Antonio, tell him about her doubts directly, without beating around the bush, and then Maybe I rushed things, the girl suddenly thought, looking at Roberto's receding back. What if it turns out that Antonio really has someone else in the city, and I rushed, taking away Roberto's hope? But this thought was so unpleasant that the girl immediately dismissed it. What did Roberto do to deserve such treatment? It was unfair and cruel. Marta firmly promised herself that tomorrow she would find Antonio or wait for him to return from the city and talk to him. This decision made her feel a bit lighter. The morning would bring certainty, and it would become clearer how to live on. "Shall we dance?" Someone from the class asked. Marta looked at the clock and shook her head. "No, I need to go home already." She wasn't lying, it was time to feed her grandmother. The girl couldn't sleep at night. She had made decisions before, but all of it felt somewhat unreal, like playing. Even less than that. These were decisions that affected the situation, but not her entire future life. And now she was trying to imagine everything that awaited her in marriage. Probably, Antonio would settle here, in this house. There was enough space, and it would be more familiar to her grandmother. In the morning, Marta would get up earlier to feed her grandmother and prepare breakfast for her husband. Then Antonio would go to work, and Marta later. Maybe she wouldn't even work and would take care of the household. After all, she couldn't leave the grandmother alone for a long time. Then, probably, in a year, Antonio and Marta would have a child. The care would increase. Now she would have to take care of both her grandmother and the baby. Thoughts about her husband and children didn't evoke any feelings in her. Marta just tried to figure out, at least approximately, how she needed to organize her life to make it a little easier. However, it seemed that it wouldn't get any easier, at least until the child grew up and went to school. But what if, by that time, she had another little one, or maybe even more? Marta had heard that some women lose the ability to conceive after the first childbirth. Lucky for them, the girl thought enviously. But, in the end, couldn't she just tell her husband after childbirth that she couldn't have more? What do these men understand about women's affairs? Behind the wall, Marta could distinctly hear her grandmother sigh heavily. She couldn't sleep either. Maybe she felt the impending changes? Maybe she was worried about what would happen next. School was over, and what was next? The granddaughter can't go to college, she won't leave her grandmother alone. And what about staying here? She needed to find a job. She would get even more tired. Marta felt sorry for the old lady. Marta really wanted to go to her grandmother, talk to her, ask for advice, or just vent and have someone listen. But her grandmother remained silent. She wouldn't give advice, and she shouldn't make her nervous. Despite the warm night, Marta suddenly felt very cold. She got out of bed, found a warm shawl in the closet, and as she passed by the window, she noticed a man who was slowly walking down the empty street. It was Antonio. Now everything will be clear, Marta thought, hastily smoothing her hair. "Antonio," she called softly, opening the window. He stopped and approached closer. "Marta, why aren't you at school?" "They're still." "Oh, right, your grandma." Marta nodded. "So, Marta," Antonio smiled, "adult life has begun. Aren't you scared?" "I'm scared, Antonio," she sighed. "I'll stay here, and now I have to work, take care of grandma, and manage the household. I'm afraid. How will I cope?" He shook his head, lost in thought. "Well, Marta, you need a good husband who will help and take care of you." "I do, Antonio," the girl whispered with a trembling heart. "Oh, if you had thought about it earlier, I would have married you." Marta lowered her gaze and felt her cheeks blush. She was glad that Antonio wouldn't see this in the darkness. Nothing can be seen at this hour. Only her nightdress gleams in the darkness. "And now?" she dared to ask, speaking quietly. "Are you not getting married now?" He sighed, or maybe smiled. "Now I'm almost married, Marta. Tomorrow, I'll take my parents to the city to meet the bride. She's a good woman, my fiancée, and kind. Her name is Paulina." The girl tried to smile, but it didn't turn out very well. The smile was not cheerful, but it was easy to hide it at night. "Well, congratulations, Antonio. I wish you and Paulina happiness and good children." Antonio stepped away and waved his hand. "Don't lose yourself. You'll make it through." Marta moved away from the window and sat on the bed. So, everything was clarified, yet it was still scary. "I rejected Roberto," she thought. "He kept his composure, didn't reveal himself, and now I'm like Roberto. Antonio will marry soon, and he no longer needs me." I put on a brave face and wished him happiness. But along with the hurt and confusion, Marta also felt relief. There was no need to marry someone she didn't love, just to avoid being alone. No need to have a child with him just because what family is without children? Marta convinced herself to lie down again, already falling asleep, thinking that if she had to choose not with her mind, but with her heart, she would choose Roberto. Only with him was she at ease and free. The thought of living with him under the same roof didn't frighten her, rather, it instilled confidence that life would now become easier. And Roberto also couldn't sleep that night. Marta turned him down and replaced him with someone else. She couldn't be blamed for it. She didn't give him any hope, and wanting to improve her life, well, who wouldn't want that? But his life collapsed. It felt strange to think that there was no need now to visit Marta in the morning to go to classes together or to escort her home. What should she have done then? Roberto didn't consider going to the city as one of his classmates because he was sure Marta wouldn't go there. Where could she go? Her grandma was bedridden. For some reason, he always thought that right after school, he and Marta would get married. He got used to this idea, and it seemed like it couldn't be otherwise. It turned out it could. "I'll go to the city," he decided. There was no point in staying at home now, and in the city. Well, maybe I could enroll somewhere, anywhere, just to have a foothold and come here less often until the pain subsided. And then, we'll see. In the morning, he boarded the train and closed his eyes. It was over. The train swayed on the rails. Pedro, the main school underachiever, rambled on about prospects, a free life, and most importantly, about city girls with open minds. Roberto didn't listen to him. He didn't want to hear anything at all, except for the soothing train sounds. The train rushed forward, leaving the entire past life behind. A girl in the admissions office handed Roberto his certificate and smiled broadly. "I don't want to deceive you. Looking at your grades, I don't know if you'll pass the entrance exam. We have essays, and, excuse me, you got a C in literature. Should I try?" He asked gloomily. "Of course, you can try. Maybe it would be better for you in the mechanics mathematics faculty." "I don't want to." "Will you accept the documents?" "I'll accept them," the girl promised. She had big gray eyes and a gentle smile. She gathered her wavy hair into a mature hairstyle, but not very neatly. Some strands kept escaping and falling onto her face. "Here's the application form, fill it out." Roberto took a pen and squinted, watching as the girl irritably tucked her unruly strands behind her ears. "You'd better let your hair down completely," he advised. "It will look beautiful." And 2 months later, Roberto returned to the village, not alone but with the young, gray-eyed Anna. Marta saw her from a distance and sighed sadly. It seemed she had already started to get used to disappointments, and she had no time to be upset. Now she worked half a day at the local store. And Grandma was taken to the hospital, so Marta commuted to the city every other day. On the way there, she dragged bags, clinking with cans and bottles, carrying broth and juice. She went there, fearing that they would tell her right from the threshold that Grandma had passed away. On the way back, there's a gray emptiness in her soul. Marta saw that her grandmother was dying, and there was nothing she could do about it. Compared to this, Roberto's wedding was trivial. Anna, as the neighbors said, was a second-year student, working in the admissions office. Roberto met her there. And then everything happened quickly. Roberto failed his exams. He thought about trying again in a year, but Anna turned out to be pregnant. So now he needed to think not about studying, but about how to feed the family. Around New Year, the young couple had their daughter, Matilde. During this time, Roberto avoided going to the store where Marta worked. It didn't bother her. Clearly, he had followed her like glue for so many years, and now he found a wife for himself in just 2 months. It felt awkward for him, like he turned out to be inconsistent. Marta thought they would hardly ever talk, but just before the new year, her grandmother passed away peacefully. Neighbors came to Marta to offer condolences and remember the old lady. Roberto arrived closer to nightfall. He didn't bring Anna along. After all, she didn't know Marta or her grandmother. Entering the room, he saw the girl sitting on the chest, sorting through her grandmother's things, nightgowns, robes, and headscarves. Roberto remained silent. Marta raised her tired eyes to him. "What should I do now? I can't figure it out. Whether to give it away. But who needs it? It's all old, and besides, it belonged to the deceased." Roberto approached her, sat down next to her, and took the colorful headscarf from the girl's hands. "You'll decide later," he said softly. "Not now. First, we need to wait for the 40 days to pass. That's what my father said when my mom died. You need the first 40 days. Marta nodded and took a deep, interrupted breath. "Well," Roberto said, pulling her head towards him on his shoulder, "don't cry, Marta. She suffered so much. She was lying there, and she understood everything, probably worried that you were still going after her. And now she might be healthy again. You don't see her, but she's here, watching you and wanting to comfort you. Don't upset her, Marta. She has suffered enough." That evening, Roberto returned home late, sullen and silent. He didn't want to answer Anna's questions. He went to bed and turned his face to the wall. Since then, he has stopped avoiding Anna's store and occasionally dropped by to help with household chores, where to shovel the snow from the roof, where to chop wood. After all, she was still a classmate. Anna didn't bother him. She pitied the girl who was left alone in the world so early. A year later, Marta gave birth to a baby girl. Everyone was amazed. She never had a husband, and the pregnancy wasn't noticeable. Perhaps it was because Marta had never been slim, and after her grandmother's death, she gained some weight. Roberto, visiting her as a neighbor, peered in occasionally, but no one believed that he was Miriam's father. After giving birth, she sold the house and moved to the suburbs. "That's how Dad went back and forth between his legal wife and my mother," sighed Miriam. "You see how it happens? There's Matilde there, and here's Miriam. He didn't decide to leave immediately. But when he left, he couldn't find his place. He loved my mom, but he got attached to yours. So he didn't know what to do, neither here nor there. And he was ashamed that he had left his wife and daughter. He started drinking, first a little bit, then it pulled him in. Other cried, telling him to go to his wife if he worried so much. But he no longer knew where to go, why, or to whom. It's a disaster when a person loses all their bearings. So, his father felt bad, burdened, and ashamed. But he didn't know how to fix everything. Later, somehow he ambushed your mom, and... well, you know the rest." "I didn't know," Matilde whispered. Miriam chuckled. "No one knew, not even Grandpa Gennaro. And my mother, Marta. Well, we buried Dad, and it was like she completely lost joy in life and stopped waiting. Now I understand that it was the onset of depression, but back then, I was just a child. What did I understand? I only saw that my mother was silent. You know, like she'd come home from work and sit, staring at one spot. And then she started drinking. I have nothing more to say. One day, she just didn't come back from work. They said she went to the city. I don't know, I never saw her again. That's the story." Matilde pressed her palms to her temples and rubbed them. "And what does it have to do with me? What did I personally do to you?" "You?" Miriam's smirk turned harsh. You had Grandpa Gennaro, a mother. They didn't leave you alone, like my parents did. And why? We seemingly have the same father and the same grandpa. So why do you have everything and I end up in an orphanage? That's why I specifically tracked you down in the city and befriended you on purpose. I waited. I was ready for a long time, very long, but I wanted you to experience it too. It's unfair when it happens the way it did. What do you say? Am I right or wrong? Matilde remained silent for a long time, then unzipped the zipper on her travel bag and took out a brightly colored, fragrant apple. Take it, she said, placing the juicy fruit in Miriam's palm. You should have told me everything right away. Why poison your soul for so many years? Why live with resentment? You're not alone in the world. You have a sister. If you'd told me earlier, you would have understood that. Miriam was staring at Matilde in astonishment. What? Don't you hate me? Matilde shrugged. Of course I don't. Let's go home. I'll give you more apples from Grandpa's garden.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.